Well, thank you for joining us. Senator Nelson and I started off with the goal of writing and passing a bipartisan bill to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA. And through negotiations with our House counterparts in consideration in both chambers, the process has been bipartisan, and the result ended up being the most significant airport security reform bill that we've seen in over a decade. And the vote that we just had here in the Senate was 89-4. They had a big vote, I should say, in the House of Representatives. But this is a piece of legislation that's really important when it comes to aviation security. It's something that we haven't addressed in a long time. And the provisions in here have been worked on for a long time. The Commerce Committee has been analyzing these issues. But with regard to the recent attacks that we've seen in places like Brussels and Istanbul, I think it's even more timely, because many of the provisions, particularly the security provisions in this bill, speak directly to some of the gaps that we perceive to exist in our aviation security system in this country, and particularly with regard to the threats that we're facing as we move forward. So a number of the provisions in here on the security front we think are really important. The Metrojet airliner that left Egypt from Sharm el-Sheikh headed for Russia, where 224 people were killed. Most experts believe the bomb was placed there by an insider. And so we strengthen the vetting provisions in this bill for airport employees who have access to secure areas in airports to try and prevent that sort of thing from happening here. Another thing that we saw in Brussels and Istanbul is areas outside the security checkpoints where people tend to be congregated because they're waiting to get through the security checkpoints represent a vulnerability. And terrorists obviously are trying to exploit some of those vulnerabilities. So the bill addresses that in a couple of specific ways, one of which is to expand the TSA pre-check program so that people get expedited through the security checkpoints in a quicker and more timely way. Other provisions in the bill deal with increasing the number of personnel, K-9 units. They call them Viper teams that can be deployed in those areas of the airport that create the highest level of vulnerability. So we think the security provisions in the bill are strong. We also think there are a number of issues in there that deal with consumer protections, one of which, of course, ensures that people who have to pay baggage fees when they check luggage on flights, if the airline loses that baggage, and if they don't get it back to them within a 12-hour period, that they have to refund that, which seems like a fundamental issue that probably should have been practiced before, but it will be now. We, in the bill, allow for families to be able to travel together. Another issue that Senator Nelson fought hard to have included in the final negotiations. And we've got provisions in here that deal with general aviation, provisions that deal with big airports, small airports, you name it, drones. Pretty much everything that deals with the aviation sector of our economy is addressed in one way, form, or another in this bill. There are provisions we would like to have had in here that didn't make it. When we passed this bill out of the Senate, it was about 400 pages long. The House of Representatives, on the other hand, wanted to do a short-term extension, which was a straight-up 7-page bill. And so we had to fight to get all the policy that we could in this bill, and we think that we got the best possible outcome given the circumstances and the hand that we were dealt. So even though there were some things that got left on the cutting room floor, those issues will get revisited. We'll see this again another 16, 17 months from now, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about those issues. But all in all, I think this is a good, strong product, the result of a long, lengthy process, which many of you have covered, and we're glad that we got it to the finish line, and we're looking forward to getting it signed by the President and enacted into law. So I'll flip it to my colleague and friend, Senator Nelson.